It's aspiring psychiatrist here. I hope you're all having a great day so far. Very quickly, I'm going to make a video on why is death so scary? And I really am looking forward to making this video because the reason I make videos is not only to refine other people's character potentially, but to refine my own character. So we're going to quickly kind of get into it, and I hope you guys enjoy the video. So first things first is, how does the human mind tend to cope with the existential kind of reality of death, right? Well, often what I've seen is when people want to subconsciously, unconsciously, whatever, when people want to sit there and avoid the idea of death in their minds for themselves, they tend to project onto their children. And so, what people tend to do, in my opinion, is they tend to project on their children their uh, expectations for themselves, for the future that they won't be able to achieve because they won't, they may not exist in that timeline. And that can include expectations of career, that can include expectations of uh, romance potentially as well, expectations of education and expectations of financial standing, social standing, or accomplishment. And so it's very tricky because when you're sitting there and you have a parent who is basically reenacting their failed hopes and dreams and projecting that onto their child, it leads to a lot of confusion within a lot of people. They feel like they have to become their parents. There's this concept in psychology called parallel projection, where we tend to over relate to those around us. We tend to over focus on the similarities to those around us. So, how else do people tend to try to escape, deny, transcend, whatever word you want to use? How do people kind of avoid this fear of death in their minds emotionally? Well, another common one is greed, right? The first most expensive uh, thing in households is usually rent, right? Makes sense. Rent is pricey. It's not easy to pay rent all the time out here because of how expensive some areas can get. Not all areas are that bad, but the second most expensive thing in most households would be um, cars, right? You wouldn't expect that, right? Because if you have a grown adult who wants to have a child, wants to have a family, you think, oh, well, like, they're going to be frugal. You would assume, oh, they're going to be wise. They're going to purchase a vehicle that has a lot of reliability. But a lot of people out here, they want people to give them the attention, the validation, and the social credit for having a vehicle. And that is, I'd say, maladaptive or negative in a sense, because at the end, no matter how much you clutch or hold or cling to the material things that you have, they aren't exactly able to go with you into the great yonder, we could call it, right? And so it's sad. It's sad. Greed is a common pitfall for many people. So next, we're going to get into kind of a general concept that is quite contentious because of how people use words and how they convey meanings based on context, right? So many of the more religiously minded, traditionally minded, or conservatively minded, they always like to say that pride comes before the fall, right? Elders will say that. But then you listen to the young people or people who are more socially progressive, and there's this idea of kind of gay pride, right? Gay pride. And so it's confusing inherently, isn't it? It's like, is pride a good thing or is it a bad thing? Is pride something that is healthy and normal? How is it? It's being used kind of differently here. That's what I perception. But then why at that point would you say, well, let's take pride in sexuality, right? Why at that point would you say, oh, let's sit here and say people should be proud for being straight? being proud for being gay. George Carlin actually talked about this. He's an atheist person who's quite intelligent. I'm more of the religiously minded in my prejudices and biases. But I think instead of Pride, Gay Pride Month, we should probably have Gay History Month, Gay Appreciation Month, Gay Acceptance Month, right? I don't think Pride is a very sustainable way of existing because everyone grows old. A lot of things, including, passions of the flesh in older age, it's vanity, it's deceptive. That's why it's good to settle down when you're young. The emotional intimacy is more lasting than the superficial physical intimacy, just biologically speaking. And so it's strange to me. It's, you know, and what tends to happen as well, because of all these confusing uses of these words, is that people tend to project onto homosexuals that in some way, because they are not reproducing, they are failing fundamentally. Many of the religious traditionalists will kind of say that, oh, because they've strayed from heteronormativity, they have failed to meet their biological kind of expectation of reproduction. But the thing is, that comes from an internal emotional world that is, I would say, confused. Gay people have no obligation to have children. They have no obligation to conform to certain artistic or creative standards that we impose on them. And they have no obligation to necessarily behave socially in a way that is practical for anyone aside from the laws of the land, right? And so it's tough. People tend to use homosexuals as a template of projection and a scapegoat. And then those who genuinely are not interested in that kind of behavior or don't want that for their children, they are guilted and shamed. It's this very unhealthy and dysfunctional dynamic. And I don't know why it continues. If we children live their lives and be who they are and not impose these expectations of pride for innate characteristics, such as sexuality, if we would just teach them to respect history, honesty, and self acceptance, we wouldn't have all this education. And so this gets into kind of the concept for me personally of reenactment, right? If they tend to repeat themselves, right? And this is where unresolved trauma, just kind of prideful, arrogant ways of thinking where one thinks they're superior to those around them, that leads to kind of circular uh, perceptions in nature. In psychopathology, they say that one of the most critical components of a self-fulfilling prophecy is you know mental illness, and they reciprocate into one another. Mental illness leads to self-fulfilling prophecies. Self-fulfilling prophecies can lead to damage to oneself that leads to further mental illness. They reciprocate. And so it's tough. Those who think of themselves as superior for superficial characteristics, generally speaking, are doomed to repeat the past, symbolically or literally. It's unfortunate. Pride and arrogance and the guise of thinking of oneself as superior, it's not an enlightening observation. It doesn't go anywhere. And so what about death, right? How does this all kind of relate to death? Well, death is this horrifying experience, and we're going to break it down as kind of a sense phenomenon with respect to people's sensitivities to such. So how do we see the world? How do we perceive the world around us? Well, we see, smell, taste, hear, and touch, right? We have these fundamental sense perceptions that we have faith in, such reflecting a true reality, right? We have faith that our senses reflect a true reality. That's why gaslighting, right? I can talk about the origin of that saying another time, but gaslighting is basically when you are seeing something and someone goes to you and says, the way that you were perceiving is incorrect with malicious intent, right? And it gets very confusing because You might see the color red, another person might see a kind of brownish red. And it's not gaslighting to disagree over the visual perception. It's just a difference in interpretation and emotional communication of the perception. But if someone's guilting you or shaming you or saying you were wrong for your perception, that would be gaslighting. So it's very interesting. These five senses, what do these lead to? Well, how do these relate to death? Well, death, emblematically and symbolically, is the cessation of your sense perceptions. It's horrifying, right? It's this kind of dramatic moment of a finality where your sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch all kind of fade from your capacity to sustain such, right? And it's I've worked with some people and talked with some people who have tried to kill themselves and I've looked into suicide attempts. Is rather dark, but when a person is dying, it's almost like they have a box around them, like a room, right? If the room around them is there, it's shrinking, and they're in the center of the room, and that box continues to shrink, almost like a coffin. It's scary, right? That box continues to shrink until that person's sense perceptions kind of right like cease to exist. And so people are horrified of this. They're horrified of this. And I don't think it's because of innate ideological reasons, such as being religious, atheist, agnostic, or somewhere in between, believing in a God, not believing in a God. I think it's because when we aren't honest about who and what we are and the things we've done and the things we've thought and felt because of our experiences, it's harder to confront the cessation of those experiences. And so a lot of times in the human mind, what you'll see is that Christians will project onto atheist, or theistic people will project onto atheist, that they have the monopoly on faith, right? We have faith in our senses. We reinforce that through prayer and meditation. You don't have a sufficient logical explanation for why your faith in your senses is reasonable, right? But then what the atheists will do is they'll say, oh, well, you rely too heavily on faith. And they'll basically say they'll say that they have the monopoly on science and rationality and understanding, right? And I'm not going to go too much into some of the more ecology, fancy words for all this, but the way that you see the world and the way that you see your internal kind of emotional dialogue and realm, these both have an interconnection, right? And it's horrifying when you die, but it's not always because of an ideological orientation. And that can affect it, I think. It's more so when people are dishonest about their lives and who they are, they're less comfortable with that life coming to an end. And that's where a lot of pride and arrogance to sustain certain patterns of thinking and behavior come from, in my opinion. But if you guys enjoyed this, I appreciate you. It was a very dark subject matter. It was not easy to make this video. It took quite a few takes. And thank you so much for watching. If you made it to this point, you are a trooper, and have fun. Enjoy your life. It's a beautiful thing because it's finite, paradoxically, not despite that fact.